Meghan and Harry, The Real Story by Lady Colin Campbell, narrated by Lucinda Bell Howard. Chapter 1. On May the 19th, 2018, when Meghan Markle stepped out of the antique Rolls-Royce conveying her and her mother Doria Ragland from the former Astor stately home Cliveden to St George's Chapel, Windsor, where she was due to be married at 12 noon, she was a veritable vision of loveliness. At that moment, one of the biggest names of the age was born. As the actress ascended the steps of St George's Chapel, its interior and exterior gorgeously decorated in the most lavish and tasteful spring flowers, she was a picture of demure and fetching modesty, stylish elegance, transparent joyousness, and radiant beauty. The simplicity of her white silk wedding dress, designed by Claire Waite Keller of Givenchy, with its bateau neckline, 3/4-length sleeves and stark, unadorned but stunningly simple bodice and skirt, coupled with the extravagant veil, 5 meters long and 3 meters wide, heavily embroidered with 2 of her favourite flowers, wintersweet and California poppy, as well as the 53 native flowers of the various Commonwealth countries and symbolic crops of wheat, and a piece of the blue dress that the bride had worn on her first date with the groom, gave out a powerful message. All bridal gowns make statements. Diana, Princess of Wales, according to her friend Caroline Pride, used hers to announce to the world, "Here I am, take notice. I'm not a bit shy and intend everyone to know who I am." Catherine Middleton stated, "I am stylish, athletic, and traditional. I aim to please and I relish my femininity. I possess exquisite but conservative taste, with just a hint of daring beneath the surface." Meghan's not only conveyed that she loved clothes, was a feminine woman despite her avowed feminism, and something of an impact specialist where presentation is concerned, but also that she was a thoughtful, considered, deliberate, and aware individual who would use traditions as and when they suited her, but was prepared to jettison them when they did not. She struck the absolutely right note for someone who was making her debut into the world's leading royal family, letting the public know that her virtues were sterling and her performance would be polished. Beneath the message, however, there was controversy. The Queen was said to be surprised that her soon-to-be granddaughter-in-law, already married and divorced once, had chosen virginal white, in defiance of all accepted custom in royal and aristocratic circles, where a nod in the direction of reality dictated that no colour lighter than cream should be worn. But Meghan was starting out as she intended to continue. Royal and aristocratic traditions were of scant importance to someone whose self-belief was so rock-solid that her father-in-law-to-be, who liked her, had already affectionately nicknamed her Tungsten. The colour of her dress was not the only surprise Meghan delivered on her wedding day. Traditionally, after the couple signs the register and rejoins the congregation, the bride curtsies to the Queen and the groom bows. It has always been done, and it was expected by all that it would be done on the 19th of May 2018. Princess Anne did it at her 2 weddings. Diana did it at hers. So too did Princess Alexandra, the Countess of Wessex, the Duchess of York, Kent and Cambridge. However, as Meghan rejoined the congregation and set about walking down the aisle with a beaming Prince Harry by her side, she omitted to curtsy when she passed the Queen. This caused consternation throughout the assembled company at St George's Chapel, one of whom told me, "No one could believe it. She walked out, sailed down the aisle with not so much as the merest bob in the direction of Her Majesty." The Queen is not on record as having made a comment or a complaint, but she will have noticed. Everyone did. Like many of the people present, I put Meghan's omission down to nervousness and forgetfulness. It really is easy for people who are not used to royal ways to forget each and every dance step in the choreography of royal life, but not everyone took so benevolent a view, especially as the run-up to the wedding had been fraught with scenes, tantrums and demands, most of which were carefully concealed from the public, although by the time of the wedding they were well known in court circles. Meghan is wonderfully self-possessed. She has supreme self-belief. She knows what she wants, and she sets about achieving it by brooking no opposition. She is astonishingly direct, in a way only Americans of a certain background who have made successes of their lives can be. She does not shy away from making demands, but expects those who are there to assist her to bring her desires to fruition. Harry adores her forthrightness and strength of character. He admires the fact that she allows no one to prevail when she sets her mind to a task. In court circles, however, where people dance around issues and no one makes a demand, much less asks a direct question or even makes a straightforward suggestion, Meghan was unwittingly making waves. She was laying the ground for the misunderstandings and bad feelings that would soon characterize relations between the couple and many of the people close to them. With the wisdom of hindsight, it is obvious that Harry should have nipped things in the bud before they degenerated further by pointing out to Meghan that she needed to adopt a more British approach. He should have explained that what works in the film industry in Hollywood goes down like a lead balloon in Britain. People would not admire her for her ballsiness, but would begin to resent her for what he and she might admire as forthrightness, but they would deplore as being difficult, demanding, and brash. Harry, however, handled this dichotomy in the worst possible way. Up to then, he had enjoyed a reputation for affability, even if he was also known to be hot-headed and so emotional that he often took things personally, when a degree of impersonality would have been the more justified reaction. This more emotional side of his character now came to the forefront in the most unfortunate fashion. He started throwing his weight around, playing the alpha male, protecting his little woman as he backed Meghan up, even when he must have known that the more positive response would have been to have a quiet word with her instead of endlessly repeating the mantra, "What Meghan wants, Meghan gets." In doing so, he not only allowed her to continue getting people's backs up quite unnecessarily, and more than likely unwittingly too, but also antagonized those who had previously had a high opinion of him. In reality, he was adding fuel to the fire when he could easily have doused the flames with one part knowledge and a second part wisdom. A case in point was the fuss Harry and Meghan made over the emerald and diamond kokoshnik Princess Eugenie had chosen for her wedding. Harry will have known the score. The date of his cousin's marriage had had to be pushed back to allow him to be married first, because he took precedence over her. It would be unfair to deprive Eugenie of the tiara she had chosen. This had once belonged to Grand Duchess Xenia of Russia, Tsar Nicholas II's elder sister. It had been sold to the royal family when the Grand Duchess was given refuge in England following the Russian Revolution and the execution of her brother and many other members of her family at the hands of the Bolsheviks. The Queen had promised Eugenie the use of it. There the matter should have rested, and would have, had Meghan not decided that she wanted to wear Grand Duchess Xenia's kokoshnik at her wedding, and Harry, so eager to fulfill her every wish, neglected to point out that she couldn't be lent something that his cousin had already been promised. There were, of course, other tiaras from which to choose. Most of the really spectacular tiaras in the British royal family's collection actually come from the Russian imperial family and were bought by Queen Mary, the present Queen's grandmother, and a great collector of art, jewels and furniture. These include the famous Grand Duchess Vladimir tiara with the detachable drop emeralds and pearls, which is only ever worn by a present or future queen. As the future wife of a second son of an heir presumptive, Meghan never had a choice of the truly spectacular jewels, to include the Vladimir of Greville tiaras, which are worn by Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall. Jewels are allocated according to precedence, and what a senior royal wears, a junior royal cannot. Although Meghan did have a choice, no incoming bride can just scoop up whatever jewels she wants and wear them as if by right. She has no right to anything. All she can do is accept a loan, and a loan, moreover, that means that the lower down the order of precedence she is, the more limited her choice. Meghan, however, is a clothes source and knows what suits her and works best as she presents the image she wants to purvey. She is not the daughter of an award-winning lighting engineer for nothing. From early childhood, she was privy to the secrets of good lighting and photography. She is bright and capable and learnt her lessons well. Her many years in front of the camera have also honed her skill in choosing what works well for her. One of her favourite words before she married into the British royal family was classy. She also understands glamour, as few other women do. Being more intelligent than most, this gives her greater insight into scenarios and allows her to have a more historic dimension than someone of her background would typically have. There is little doubt that Grand Duchess Xenia's Kokoshnik appealed not only because it is more spectacular, but also because its history is more romantic and exotic. Who, with Meghan's sensibilities, would fail to want the more spectacular and historic tiara over Queen Mary's bandeau, made in 1932 to accommodate a brooch, which is still detachable? If Meghan's choice could not be faulted as regards taste, it was on promissory grounds, and the Queen could not very well be expected to ignore her promise to Eugenie, nor would it be appropriate for successive brides to wear the same tiara. The Queen, after all, could not collude with her granddaughter's thunder being stolen by a granddaughter-in-law. So she was put in the onerous position of having to make it clear by way of her trusted dresser, dress designer and good friend Angela Kelly, to Meghan and Harry that they would have to accept what was on offer and not demand what was not. The matter might have rested there, with no one any the wiser, had Harry and Meghan not made an almighty fuss, not only about the tiara, but also about such things as the scent of St. George's Chapel and the ingredients of certain dishes being prepared for the wedding. Meghan, in the questing, forthright way which had hitherto worked so well for her, caused great offence to a member of staff when she implied that the individual was a liar because Meghan claimed to be able to taste the existence of an ingredient which she had banned from a dish. The purported culprit, deeply offended, denied its existence, and Meghan was duly informed that royals don't speak to their staff like that, causing offence all around, for now the bride-to-be had injured feelings as well. There was also the kerfuffle surrounding how St. George's Chapel smelt. Meghan floated the idea of having it sprayed with a perfume of her choice, a suggestion that went down like a lead balloon. As one courtier told me, "We were really astonished to find that this minor TV actress from California was so demanding that she was giving us the message that we should up our game and satisfy her much higher standards." While the courtier thought that the arrogance and impertinence were breathtaking, exceeded only by the disrespect, Meghan would have had an entirely opposite view. From her perspective, it was her wedding. She could make any demand she wanted. As Harry kept on saying, what she wanted she must be given. He knew that after years of struggle, she had finally achieved the way of life she had always aspired to, and he wanted to have all her desires fulfilled. As far as he and she were concerned, who were these people obstructing her? They were merely employees, irrespective of their pretensions. They were there to serve, and now that she was going to be a member of the royal family, they should be doing all in their power to make her happy. Meghan will neither have foreseen the offence she was causing nor have realised that she was trampling on sensitivities, though in reality she and Harry were belittling staff and making them feel devalued. As far as she and Harry were concerned, she was their victim, they were not hers. How could they be, when they were there to serve her, and they had failed to do so? What Harry ought to have known, and Meghan could not have, was that most people at court work for ridiculously low sums. The rewards of service to the monarchy are all non-financial, and what is important to them isn't measured in practical coinage, but in terms of the regard their employers and fellow employees have for one another. This was, in actuality, the clash between the straightforward transactionalism of the California way of life and the far more subtle and obtuse royal way. But it also shows why each side regarded itself as entitled to its feelings. The values and traditions of the old world were now colliding with the requirements and expectations of the new, and though no one knew it at the time, this clash of two different and sometimes incompatible cultures would only worsen, creating problems but also opportunities for all sorts of interest groups, not the least of which were the press, various political entities, and even the couple themselves. Before the marriage, therefore, the rumblings about Meghan and Harry's behaviour and how they were rubbing people up the wrong way had begun. The public, of course, remained unaware of any of this. The hope in royal circles was that Meghan was suffering from pre-wedding nerves, that Harry was playing macho man to impress his wife-to-be, but that things would settle down once they were married. That Meghan would dampen down her Californian ways, and that Harry, who was rapidly alienating admirers and gaining a well-earned reputation for throwing his weight around in a wholly unacceptable manner, would revert to the right-on lovable bloke he had been up to then. No one foresaw that Meghan and Harry were on a roll, that they would spark each other to ever greater heights, that they would not buckle to any opposition, that they regarded those who stood in their way as needlessly obstructive, and that if they didn't get their way, they'd decamp. Certainly no one in royal circles could ever have envisaged a scenario where, within 18 months, female MPs, the Archbishop of Canterbury and the author Hilary Mantel would be adding their voices to those who claimed that Meghan's failure to adjust to royal life was down to racism, while she and Harry went about moving from the restraints of royalty to the freedom of global celebrity entrepreneurism. Throughout Britain, in particular in royal, aristocratic, media, political, populist and ethnic circles, people wanted the marriage to be a success. Although in royal and aristocratic circles there had been initial reservations about the suitability of the union when the couple first got together, owing to the celerity with which Harry and Meghan had committed themselves, and the fear that each of them might have been blinded by their desires and might not be well suited for the long haul, the last thing anyone wanted was yet another divorce. Once it became apparent that Harry was determined to marry her, the whole royal family and the court fell into line. Meghan's virtues were focused upon, not only in terms of her undoubted intelligence and determination, but also her sweetness of manner, her charm, vivacity, sense of humour, and last, but by no means least, her heritage. The fact that she was a good-looking, stylish, glamorous, photogenic, mature woman with an interest in philanthropy was one thing, but what sealed things in her favour was her ancestry. Not only was she an American, and a well-educated one, with a patina of sophistication, but she was also a woman of colour. The Queen, who is well known to be a wit, said to a friend, "Mr. Corbyn will find it much more difficult to get rid of us now that Meghan's in the family." This conveyed a welcome degree of truth as well as humour, for Meghan's biracial identity made the monarchy both reflective and representative of multicultural, multiracial Britain in a way that a white, 37-year-old California-born actress who had been a cast member of a popular television series could never have been. The British press and general public, as well as the political establishment, also embraced Meghan's mixed-race heritage. There had been other mixed-race unions in other royal houses, and the general feeling was that it was high time the British royal family caught up with their continental cousins. The Queen of Denmark's second son had married a Eurasian woman. The ruling Prince of Liechtenstein's second son had married a Panamanian-born American of colour. Prince Rainier of Monaco's nephew had married a West Indian of colour. Two of the Archduke Geza of Austria's sons had married 3 sub-Saharan Africans. The Queen had given her blessing to 2 of her first cousins once removed, when the Honourable James Lascelles married the Nigerian aristocrat Joy Elias Rilwan in 1999. And Lady Davina Windsor married Gary Christie Lewis, a Maori carpenter, house renovator, in 2004. But both these cousins were members of the extended as opposed to the actual royal family. Meghan Markle's inclusion in the British royal family itself would send out a positive message which would not only play well in Britain, but also in the Commonwealth. Of course, not everyone everywhere shared this viewpoint. There have always been, and presumably always will be, people who are racist. They will not have been happy with Meghan's inclusion in the royal family, but they were sufficiently few and far between to be of no consequence. Moreover, it is a crime in Britain to discriminate against someone on the grounds of race. Hate crimes are rigidly enforced by the authorities, so the racists will have found themselves baying into the abyss, ignored by all but a few like-minded bigots. In fact, they were both voiceless and powerless and would never become a factor, though their existence would confuse the American press into thinking that Meghan was a victim of racism in Britain, when nothing could have been further from the truth. It is fair to say that the racist minority aside, practically everyone welcomed the marriage, mostly on racial grounds, and no one at court wanted the behind-the-scenes difficulties to leak out, lest they colour the public's opinion and acceptance of Meghan. Her father's non-attendance was a blip, which was managed as well as it could have been, and the day itself went off without a hitch. According to Nielsen Social, 29 million Americans and 18 million Britons watched the wedding, while the BBC estimated that 1.9 billion people tuned in worldwide. That night, the bride ratified her style credentials by wearing a classical white silk crepe halter neckline evening dress by Stella McCartney to the black tie reception at Frogmore House. Situated on the Crown Estate, Windsor, in Windsor Great Park, it is a 5-minute drive from the castle. Harry drove Meghan there in an ice blue E-Type Jaguar, which coordinated perfectly with the large emerald-cut aquamarine ring belonging to his mother Diana. This Meghan wore on her right hand. It was, according to people who attended it, a great party with a wonderful atmosphere, and the couple seemed very much in love. Not since the early days of Prince and Princess Michael's marriage have I seen a royal couple so in love, a friend said. They couldn't keep their hands off each other. It really was very touching. One would have hoped, after such a brilliant start, that the couple would continue to be as feted and admired as they were on their wedding day. Everyone I knew was rooting for them. They even made the mature and, some would say, woke choice of not going on honeymoon immediately. Meghan and Harry both let it be known that they were deeply committed to their work, which would revolve around charitable and humanitarian activities. Being in their mid to late 30s and having been living together prior to the marriage, they hardly had need of a honeymoon the way a young couple starting out life together would. Yet 4 days after the wedding, I was having dinner at the house of an influential aristocrat with impeccable palace connections when I heard a report that filled me with foreboding. The day before, Meghan had joined Harry and Prince Charles and Camilla at a garden party at Buckingham Palace to celebrate the Prince of Wales' patronages in recognition of his 70th birthday. What had taken place then, which I will cover later on in this work, was so shocking as to lead all of us to conclude that Meghan was utterly unsuited to the role of royal duchess, and that it would be a miracle if the marriage worked out. None of us envisaged that she and Harry would be resourceful enough to find a way of moving beyond their royal status, and that they would remain a couple while forging a non-royal way of life in the United States of America. But if what had happened was true, and it was, there was little doubt that she was no more suited to royal life than Angelina Jolie would be to competitive boxing. It was hardly surprising that they would lurch from one controversy to another in the light of Meghan's unsuitability to royal life and Harry's blanket support for her. His failure to ever enlighten her as to where she was going wrong only ensured that she went from unintentional blunder to unintentional blunder. For every foot that they put right, they put 4 feet wrong. To those of us who wanted Meghan to remain in Britain as a fully fledged member of the royal family, sprinkling her gold dust as she went about her royal duties, and furthered the cause of racial unity throughout the country and the Commonwealth, this was a tragic outcome which could so easily have been averted had Harry enlightened his wife rather than supporting her in a path that would ultimately cause both of them misery and result in their departure. All he needed to do was handle things slightly differently. He could easily have been more instructive, making her aware that she was creating antagonism when it was obvious that she wanted approbation. Then the outcome could have been so different. As it was, Meghan's conduct was inadvertently creating so much friction and attracting such criticism that it was soon leading the couple and their supporters to question whether the basis was racist. This was not a happy state of affairs for the couple or for any monarchist, though it would prove to be a welcome bludgeon for Republicans, anti-monarchists and left-wingers who want to change the social order. Despite this negative outcome, the problems arising out of Meghan's failure to adjust to the British way did make for a more interesting narrative than would otherwise have been the case had she slotted into her royal role the way we all hoped. Had any author written a work of fiction with a plot along the lines of the Meghan and Harry story, it would have been dismissed as too fantastical to be believed. Yet, when one looks at their histories, the couple's trajectory has a sense of appropriateness which suggests that they could well pull several rabbits out of their hats and end up just where they want to be, at the apex of celebrity, as the most feted, revered royal couple in the United States. For both their sakes, but even more than that, for the sake of the hundreds of millions of people of colour all over the world whose hopes and expectations are vested in their success, I hope they do. Chapter 2. For a couple whose backgrounds are so radically different in worldly terms, Meghan and Harry were born to parents whose union shared surprising similarities. Both the Prince and Princess of Wales and Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Markle were mismatched. Once their marriages failed, both sets of parents would try their best to spare their children from suffering from the fallout, in the process exacerbating its effects in unexpected ways. Had Harry and Meghan been born to couples who were more compatible, more evenly matched and more aware of the need to provide stronger boundaries and less indulgence, it is unlikely that either the Duke or the Duchess of Sussex would ever have had as much in common as they do. For all their differences, they also share such profound similarities that this unique combination has proven to be a potent force binding them together in ways that make them a uniquely strong couple. Rachel Meghan Markle was born 3 years before Harry on the 4th of August, 1981. Her father, Thomas Wayne Markle Sr., was, according to her, a successful 37-year-old lighting director for a soap opera who had received a Chicago Midwest Emmy for the television show Made in Chicago in 1975, and would later on be a co-recipient of 2 Daytime Emmy Awards for the popular soap opera General Hospital in 1985 and 2001. He was nominated on several other occasions as well, and also worked on the long-running series Married with Children, while My Mom was a temp at the studio when they met. Doria Lois Ragland was 4 weeks shy of her 25th birthday at the time of her daughter's birth, and had been married for a year and 9 months. Meghan likes to think he was drawn to her sweet eyes and her afro, plus their shared love of antiques. Whatever it was, they married and had me. They moved into a house in the Valley in LA, to a neighbourhood that was leafy and affordable. Tom Sr. was earning some $200,000 per annum, so while not wealthy, the family was certainly comfortable. It might be difficult for people of a certain age to imagine how it was for interracial couples 4 decades ago. The reality is it took courage for both the Caucasian Tom and the Afro-American Doria Markle to embark upon their union. Admittedly, Hollywood, where they worked, was a lot less colour-prejudiced than the hinterlands of Newport, Pennsylvania and Cleveland, Ohio, where Markle and Ragland families came from. But even in California, mixed-race couples were still more of an exception than the norm, and Meghan states that some of her early memories were coloured by the embarrassment of people mistaking her mother for her nanny. As they lived in a white neighbourhood and appeared to have been the only mixed-race family nearby, the confusion of the other residents as to what role Doria played in the fair-skinned Meghan's life might well have been a matter of ignorance and unthinking expectation rather than prejudice. But to a proud and strong woman like Doria, it was humiliating nevertheless to be mistaken for her daughter's nanny. There is every indication that this was one of the catalysts which made the marriage as short-lived as it was. Although Meghan was Doria's first, and would prove to be her only child, her father already had a son and daughter from his first marriage. In 1964, at the age of 20, Tom had married Rosalind Lovelace, a 19-year-old secretary he had met at an on-campus party at the University of Chicago. In November of that year, their daughter Yvonne, now Samantha Marie, was born, followed 2 years later by Thomas Wayne Markle Jr. After graduating from college, Tom Sr. worked as a lighting director at WTTW-TV Channel 11, the primary public broadcasting service in Chicago, Illinois, winning his first Emmy in 1975. At first, the marriage was happy, but within a few years, Rosalind was feeling neglected. According to her, Tom spent all hours of the day and night working. His aim was to win an Emmy, and while he was bringing in good money, he not only neglected her but caroused with other women. By the early 70s, the marriage was over, and the couple separated. Tom lived in Chicago and had the children for weekends, but after he was nominated for his first Emmy, he moved to California, settling in Santa Monica. Samantha, who did not get on with her mother or her brother, joined him first. Then a traumatized Tom Jr. arrived, following an incident when Rosalind's boyfriend apprehended burglars and was shot in front of mother and son. Tom Jr. promptly fled to the safety of California, where the one fly in the ointment from his point of view was the presence of his sister, for whom he had an innate antipathy. With both children now living with him, Tom moved to a spacious 5-bedroomed house on Providencia Street, adjacent to the Woodland Hills Country Club in the San Fernando Valley. Its location made the Markle residence one of the more desirable properties in the area. Even now, it is predominantly a white neighborhood, with some 80% of the population being Caucasian and less than 3.5% Afro-American. But in the 1980s, there were even fewer people of colour living there. It was a prosperous area and has remained so, with fashionable Calabasas to its east. According to the Markles, in the early days of Tom and Doria's relationship, they were extremely happy. She brought a welcome sense of family to the household, unifying them in a way that had not existed before. She herself came from a loving family and even included the Markles in the Ragland family Thanksgiving celebrations. Tom Jr. was surprised at how warm and inclusive her parents and her half-brother Joseph and half-sister Sandra were, and commented that they were the kind of family I had always wanted. Even after Doria's parents divorced and her father married a kindergarten teacher named Ava Burrow and produced a son named Geoffrey Ragland, then divorced, Doria remained close to all of them. The Raglands were a modest but by no means well-off family. Doria's father, Alvin, owned an antique shop named 'Twas New, while her mother was a nurse. They were what would be categorized as petit bourgeois in Europe and middle class in America. Doria herself was something of a hippie, which made her warmth and kindness even more appealing to the children than she would have been had she presented in a more conventional manner. Shortly after moving into the Providencia Street house, she decided that what the family needed was something they could all love. She therefore took Tom Jr. to an animal shelter, where they chose a Beagle Golden Retriever mix, which he named Bo, and which became a much-loved pet. Like many 25-year-olds, Doria was not sure exactly what she wanted to do with her life. She had tried her hand at being a makeup artist before Meghan's birth, but with a baby and 2 stepchildren to cater to, as well as running a house which would later be described as cavernous, and a husband who worked 80- and 90-hour weeks, she found being a housewife less than appealing. She therefore took up yoga with a view to teaching it, and only too soon was farming out babysitting duties to her mother Jeanette and stepson Tom Jr. Her 17-year-old stepdaughter had no interest in babysitting, preferring instead to be out partying with her friends. There have been reports that Samantha used to refer to Doria as the maid, but these appear to be apocryphal, as both families remember everyone getting on well, even if, in typical teenage fashion, Samantha was focused more on having a good time with her friends than on being an integral part of the family. Theirs was nevertheless an extremely relaxed household, with pretty much anything going. The children were allowed to come and go as they pleased, to have their friends around, even to smoke pot if they were so inclined. According to both Toms, Tom Sr. was completely besotted with Meghan from the moment of her birth. His every spare moment was spent with her. He was even more in love with her than he was with Doria, and he also gave her more of his time and attention than he had ever given his two elder children. This seems to have caused some resentment with Samantha, who was jealous of the little princess when she saw the degree of attention she was getting from her father. But to say that it was a problem would be to exaggerate what was, after all, a perfectly ordinary situation, albeit one laden with possibilities for contemporaneous resentments to find inconvenient expression in the future. There is also the suggestion that Doria felt sidelined by Tom Sr. as he worshipped at the altar of his flower as both parents started calling the baby. Reading between the lines of what the family now says, it is likely that Doria's reaction to Tom Sr.'s fixation on Meghan was akin to Samantha's. Not that Doria did not love her daughter, but she appears to have wanted Tom Sr. to be more emotionally engaged with her than he thereafter was. Only too soon, the couple was squabbling. Doria resented being left alone for most of the time with the baby and her stepchildren, while Tom worked and worked and worked. Then when he came home, he made a big deal of the baby and took his wife for granted. Up to then, theirs had been an extremely relaxed household, but as tensions developed between the workaholic Tom Sr. and the neglected Doria, she too emulated the habits of her stepdaughter and started to come and go as she pleased, often parking the baby with her mother or with Tom Jr. According to Meghan, when she was 2, her parents separated. Her mother went back to her grandmother Jeanette's house, where they lived during the week, while she returned to her father to spend weekends with him. She remembered harmony reigning supreme, with never a squabble or harsh word between the two of them. This was quite possible, though the family remembered superficial civility rather than real warmth between the couple. Meghan seems to have candy-coated a more acrid scenario, and moreover was doing so for good reason. The whispers are that Doria not only realised that she didn't want to be alone with a husband who was never around and took her for granted when he was, but that she actually didn't want to be with a husband at all. Thereafter, she would pursue a life of such extreme privacy that the question has been asked what, if anything, she had to hide. In choosing to lead her life in such a secretive way, she would thereafter be both resolute and independent. The fact that she did so with the quiet dignity for which she has become known, and ensured that civility reigned between her ex-husband and herself, at least until Meghan and Tom fell out, since when he has found her to be unresponsive, is testament to her strength of character and her ability to achieve what she wants in her own quiet and determined way. Both sides of Meghan's family have confirmed that while she was growing up, nothing was too good for her. Her father spoiled her from the time she was a baby. Although her mother laid down boundaries, she also spoiled her, as did the extended families. At the age of 2, around the time of her parents' separation, she was enrolled in the Hollywood Little Red Schoolhouse. This was an exceptional school, started by an exceptional woman whose objective was to create exceptional adults. Ruth Pease, born Stover, was the only child of deaf parents. As a result, she was teased from early childhood and grew up valuing kindness and diversity, as well as education and character. During the Second World War, she ran a nursery school for 6 children at her house. One charge was a half-Chinese boy whose parents had had difficulty finding a place for him elsewhere. At the time, the US was at war with Japan, and the child, who was often mistaken for Japanese, attracted such prejudice that no one else would take him in. Ruth's landlord then objected to her running a nursery school from his property, necessitating a move to a house nearby, on a quiet, tree-lined street named Highland Avenue. Her husband Robert painted the building red. They expanded to some 20 children, and to distinguish it from a daycare centre, Pease, in 1951, helped to form the Preschool Association of California. According to her daughter, Debbie Webb, people started referring to it as the Little Red Schoolhouse. So they changed the school's name and added the storybook bell tower, which became a standout feature. Diversity was one of Mrs. Pease's aims, and over the years the school acquired such a good reputation that its alumni included the children of the 1950s sex symbol Jane Mansfield, Johnny Depp, and Flea, bassist for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, as well as diplomats and people from more average backgrounds. By 1968, new building codes required the tearing down of the old building and the construction of a new one. Meghan therefore arrived in 1983 to a much enlarged and expanding institution whose reputation for excellence and diversity was second to none locally. By no means cheap, from $20,000 to $25,000 at today's prices, it was by that time one of the main go-to centres of learning for the children of the Hollywood elite. Meghan would spend 9 years there, flourishing under the ministrations of a progressive but structured regimen based upon the 4 stages of cognitive development formulated by the Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget. The location of the Hollywood Little Red Schoolhouse could not have been more convenient for Tom and Doria. He worked at the ABC studios in nearby Los Feliz, while her workplace, where she was training to be a social worker, was a few minutes away and easily accessible to her new home just south of Hollywood. After school, Doria, always physical, would take Meghan for bike rides, runs, or yoga, and they would end the day with mother and daughter making dinner. Meghan now attributes her love of cooking to this early regimen, so clearly it was a happy activity. In 1992, at the age of 11, Meghan transferred to Immaculate Heart High School. This again was a school where Hollywood's elite and aspirational sent their children. Founded in 1906 and located on a beautiful hillside property in Los Feliz, LA, it was, and remains, a Catholic preparatory school for girls from grades 6 to 12. We celebrate more than a century of nurturing the spiritual, intellectual, social and moral development of students as they distinguish themselves as women of great heart and right conscience, the school maintains. And once more, it was a bastion of elitism intermingling with some children of more ordinary background. Alumni include Tyra Banks, Lucy Arnaz, Mary Tyler Moore and Diane Disney, as well as several girls who have gone on to make their names in the entertainment industry. From now until she went to university, Meghan would live mostly with her father. They had moved from the Providencia Street house to a smaller and more modest place near the school and his workplace. She remembered spending afternoons after school, dressed in her distinctive Catholic school uniform, at the studio where her father was working. She learnt all about lights and camera angles and the myriad of other techniques that make up the magic that is Hollywood. She recounted how every day after school for 10 years I was on the set of Married with Children, which is a really funny and perverse place for a little girl in a Catholic school uniform to grow up. There were a lot of times my dad would say, "Meg, why don't you go and help with the craft services room over there? This is just a little off colour for your 11-year-old eyes." Ironically, it was race, not sex, that was developing into an issue for Meghan, though it is obvious from all she and everyone who knew her says that it was a problem she was careful to keep to herself. At least, at the time. There was, for instance, the time she was compelled to fill out a mandatory census questionnaire in her English class. Asked to choose between boxes for white, black, Hispanic or Asian, she was befuddled, so asked her teacher which one she should choose. The teacher recommended Caucasian, "Because that's how you look, Meghan," she remembered. But she refused to do so. Not as an act of defiance, but rather a symptom of my confusion. I couldn't bring myself to do that, to picture the pit in her belly sadness my mother would feel if she were to find out. So I didn't tick the box. I left my identity blank, a question mark, an absolute incomplete, much like how I felt. These are not the words of a child who is comfortable with her identity, but of one who is thoughtful, perplexed with uncertainty and troubled by it. Later on, Meghan spoke to her father, who told her that next time she should simply create her own box and tick that. This suggests that Meghan was trying to reconcile the conflicts arising out of being a child of colour who could be viewed by her peers as white and didn't really know where she fitted in. Many other mixed-race Americans, being asked the same question, would have unquestioningly answered black. The fact that she did not shows that, even at that age, she had a more nuanced view of the subject than many others did. While she was not prepared to deny her African antecedents, nor was she prepared to resile away from her Caucasian. Because she did not look obviously mixed race, and the only parent who seems to have had any profile at the school at that time was her father, many of her classmates simply assumed she was white. On one occasion, a cabal of girls even asked her to join a white girls-only club, her response being a non-explanatory, "Are you kidding me?" By her own account, my mixed-race heritage may have created a grey area surrounding my self-identification, keeping me with a foot on both sides of the fence. Later on, she would work through the conflict, to embrace that, to say who I am, to share where I'm from, to voice my pride in being a strong, confident, mixed-race woman. But before she could do so, she had to work her way through the grey to come to the light. This early conflict would ultimately not only strengthen her, but also deepen her. It gave her empathy for those who also did not fit in easily into one of life's many boxes. According to her school friend Elizabeth McCoy, if someone was being treated unfairly, she stuck up for them. She was a genuinely decent human being who looked out for people who needed help. She gave a damn about people other than herself. Her former homeroom advisor, Christine Knudsen, thought she'd take conversations to a deeper level. She had a lot of depth, probably because of her own experiences and hard knocks growing up, referring to her parents' divorce, though equally the issues surrounding her racial identity must also have influenced Meghan's thinking. Tellingly, Knudsen did not remember race being an issue at all at the school. It was not a big deal simply because our school is so diverse. There's no looking down on someone because she comes from something different than you do. A recent breakdown of the diversity of the students shows that 35% were white, 20% Latina, 17% multiracial, 17% Asian or Pacific Islander, 5% black, and 6% preferred not to state. The year Meghan graduated, the demographics were similar, the main difference being that there were slightly more black students. These figures mean that Meghan was by no means the only biracial student, and indeed non-Caucasians being a two-thirds majority, she was in the majority rather than the minority, save as her appearance went. The pattern that emerges is that the pressure Meghan was under regarding her race was to a large extent internal rather than external. She was being affected by the conflicts many other people of colour who inadvertently pass for white have suffered throughout the ages. The singer Marsha Hunt once described her blue-eyed, blonde-haired grandmother of colour, by this time driven insane, staring at herself in the mirror, befuddled as to how she could have been categorised as black when she looked white. Meghan was a clever child and would grow into an intelligent woman. She had witnessed from early childhood how my mum, caramel in complexion with her light-skinned baby in tow, was being asked where my mother was since they assumed she was the nanny. One would have to be lacking in empathy to fail to see how such experiences would have coloured the feelings of both mother and daughter. They would have had to be inhuman not to be embarrassed, annoyed, humiliated, aware of the cultural disparity between blacks and whites, and subject to a host of conflicting feelings, few of which would have been comfortable to experience. No child likes being different. No child wants to stand out from the crowd. No child wants to know that people think its mother is its servant. It is therefore understandable that no one has any memory of Meghan ever volunteering information on the subject of her race. Without actively concealing it, she was, by omission, avoiding the subject. Because Immaculate Heart was a Catholic school, and Catholicism preaches that there are both sins of commission and omission, Meghan will have been aware that to omit to assert her identity was tantamount to a sin of omission. This awareness can have done nothing to reduce the pressure that she felt as she was mistaken for white, for while she never actively denied her heritage and was indeed fond of her mother and her mother's family, she also did not assert it actively. Such a dilemma would have been difficult for any child to endure. It must have driven her back into herself, and by her own account, she was a part of no special group and would volunteer for activities to avoid having to eat lunch alone. She was well liked by all and was friendly with many, but she had no actual circle of friends, felt isolated for all her superficial popularity, and was therefore already functioning as a solitary and independent unit. As she put it, my high school had cliques, the black girls and white girls, the Filipino and the Latina girls. Being biracial, I felt somewhere in between. So every day during lunch, I busied myself with meetings, French club, student body, whatever one could possibly do between noon and 1 p.m. I was there, not so that I was more involved, but so that I wouldn't have to eat alone. Although Meghan had a best friend, Nikki Priddy, with whom she had been schooled since the age of 2, and they would obviously have lunch together some of the time, her statements indicate that she felt that her racial identity was a problem with which she was finding it difficult to deal. However, rather than feeling sorry for herself or becoming embittered by her circumstances, she was already positive and self-confident enough to find resourceful solutions which kept her occupied and gained her the approbation of her teachers. The message one receives is that this early solution to the problem of isolation helped her develop a self-reliance and independence that not only provided her with positive feedback, but also hid her isolation behind a facade of affability. These were traits that would serve Meghan well in adulthood. Outstanding success in adulthood might initially be a question of luck, but maintaining it and capitalizing upon it to the extent that she has are a matter of grit, endurance, determination, and discipline. These are all qualities that are enhanced when adults have surmounted early hardship or deprivation, and Meghan's revelations of her early struggles reveal that she did indeed suffer from a sense of alienation as a result of her biracialism. Circumstance forced her into being something of a lone wolf, and lone wolves make the best hunters. Although Meghan's identity struggles were not obvious to anyone when she was growing up, already her determination was. According to Maria Pollia, who taught her theology in her junior year, she was a focused young woman who challenged herself to reflect on the toughest texts. She did not shy away from challenges but embraced them and sometimes even sought them out. A case in point was Meghan's willingness to volunteer after her teacher had mentioned in class that she worked with homeless people. When she informed Pollia that she too had worked with them and wanted to do so again, she sent her to the Skid Row kitchen, where she herself worked. My parents came from little, so they made a choice to give a lot, buying turkeys for homeless shelters at Thanksgiving, delivering meals to people in hospices, giving spare change to those asking for it, Meghan would later explain. Though her introduction to charity work, like Diana, Princess of Wales's, initially came from observing her parents endowing those less fortunate than themselves, it was really through their schools that both women converted an initial introduction into an established practice. Meghan now spent a year and a half working on Skid Row, and Pollia said, "The people that I knew at the kitchen would tell me what a natural she was. Skid Row is a very scary place. Once she got over that and she was talking to people, she knew everybody's names." For all the care she showed to strangers, Meghan had trouble behaving similarly towards her father. Nikki Priddy remembered that as Meg got older she had to parent Tom a little more, and she couldn't do that. Despite the diplomatic tightrope she walked as she carried messages back and forth between her civil parents, Meghan had always been the one both parents had taken care of, and she did not take well to having those roles reversed. Her refusal to do for her father what she was doing for strangers gives an invaluable insight into her character and shows that even at an early age she knew where she wanted to establish boundaries. Soup kitchens are very much one thing or another, There are no shades of grey. You are either poor and needy, or you are helping the poor and needy. The lines of demarcation could not be clearer. Within those parameters, the lonely, sensitive, giving, loving, and emotionally needy have scope to achieve all the human connectedness they yearn for as they are bountiful to strangers. Because the contact between giver and recipient is essentially impersonal in terms of identity, while being intensely personal within the moment, the atmosphere is often far more highly charged than it would be in more ordinary circumstances. This is gratifying for both the giver and recipient, and explains why so many people who feel alienated work with the less fortunate. There is little doubt that this dynamic was at play with Meghan. Thereafter, a girl whose identity had caused her both pain and confusion would seek out those who might seem underprivileged, but were to her sources of warmth, meaning, and human connectedness. And they came without the risks and pitfalls involved with companionship with her peers. Giving to strangers was one thing. Giving to loved ones, who she felt should be giving to her, was something else. Polly remembered how Meghan took to working on Skid Row with such alacrity that she would update her on the specifics of what Betty was up to and whether Ralph still had his dog or Fred his fish. She had discovered a great way to rise above the barriers of isolation in which the grey areas of her racial identity had bogged her down. Meanwhile, Meghan was learning one of life's most profound lessons. Goodness really can be its own reward, and its benefits were both practical and emotional. But to achieve them, you had to be proactive. And proactive Meghan certainly was. By this time, she was well on the road to becoming the activist she would later grow into being, although she now credits Polly with having provided her with encouragement and inspiration. The most cursory of examinations reveals that her father, in fact, played at least as fundamental a role. As she herself used to admit, Tom Sr. instilled the belief in her that she could achieve anything she wanted as long as she strove for it. Intensely hard-working, courageous in standing up for what he believed in, and forthright, he encouraged her to have a voice and to use it. Disparate members of her family attribute the remarkable degree of self-confidence Meghan possesses, and possessed from her youth, to the encouragement her father gave her to cultivate her judgment, trust it, and act upon it. There is, for instance, the matter of the ivory dishwashing liquid advertisement, which has assumed almost mythical status since Meghan became a successful actress, then an even more famous duchess. Like all myths, cause and effect are problematic, and the numbers don't quite add up, but the basics are indisputable. In 1995, Meghan saw a commercial for ivory-clear dishwashing liquid with the tagline, "Women all over America are fighting greasy pots and pans." According to an account she gave at a United Nations conference in the years when she was still a relatively unknown actress, 2 boys from my class said, "Yeah, that's where women belong, in the kitchen." I remember feeling shocked and angry, and also just feeling so hurt. It just wasn't right, and something needed to be done. Thomas Markle Sr. encouraged her to write letters of complaint, which by her own account she did, mailing them to the First Lady Hillary Clinton, the high-profile women's rights advocate Gloria Allred, and Procter & Gamble, the manufacturers of ivory-clear dishwashing liquid. While the First Lady and the controversial lawyer responded, Procter & Gamble did not. According to Meghan, a month later they replaced the ad with one that said that people all over America are fighting greasy pots and pans. This led her to believe that her complaint had been responsible for the change. As she put it to the UN, "It was at that moment that I realized the magnitude of my actions. At the age of 11, I had created my small level of impact by standing up for equality." Empowering though that message was, there are 4 difficulties with the scenario, all of which were picked up once Meghan and Harry started going out seriously, and the palace did the background checks it does on all people who become closely involved with the royals. Firstly, Meghan was not 11 in 1995, but 14. Secondly, Hillary Clinton was not First Lady in 1992 when Meghan was 11, but became First Lady in 1993 when Meghan was 12. Thirdly, there is no evidence that her sole letter altered the course of history. Procter & Gamble indubitably changed its tagline, but it was optimistic of Meghan to suppose that it did so as a result of one letter written by the 11 or even 14-year-old Meghan Markle. Lastly, no advertising agency could replace an advertisement in a month. Advertisements take months to prepare. They are parts of advertising campaigns in which spontaneity and responsiveness of the sort to which Meghan was laying claim simply do not exist. Had she suggested that hers might have been one of the many letters that led to change, had she not provided such a tight timeline which proved that her letter could have had no impact whatsoever, she would have been on firmer ground. But by presenting the facts as she did, she undermined the legitimacy of her claims. In the process, she opened herself up to suspicions that would lead a courtier who values integrity to conclude that she was a typical Hollywood type, always pushing herself forward in the most obvious manner, when a more modest and realistic approach would have indicated integrity. As it is, when one watches the tape of that speech, one winces at her rank egotism, not to mention the naivety displayed by so many Hollywood types who think, because they have said that black is white and pink is green, everyone accepts this fiction as fact. In fairness to Meghan, she is a creature of Hollywood. The values there are different from those of palaces. Fantasy and self-promotion are not frowned upon, nor is exaggeration, all of which are viewed as valid tools for getting your message across. A 14-year-old who writes a letter which garners praise from her school, as hers did, and which earns the standard responses that the Hillary Clintons and Gloria Allreds customarily send out to anyone who contacts them, nevertheless has just cause to be proud of her accomplishment, even if she unknowingly mistakes the polite response that public figures send out as being something more personal, and further believes that, because the company then altered its tagline, it did so as a result of her letter. Be that as it may, this was one of those turning points that each individual has in his or her life. Like any other, it also had long-reaching effects, just as how it empowered Meghan to conclude that her actions had had more of an effect than they could possibly have had, thereby encouraging her to adopt the role of activist. It also induced people who would otherwise have viewed her neutrally to suspect her of inflating herself beyond her natural entitlement. This is where the exacting standards of the old world collide with the embellishments of the new. Self-promotion and exaggeration have traditionally been viewed with suspicion in the royal and aristocratic worlds, where one's word has always been one's bond. There is an elaborate code of behaviour preventing people from too overtly pushing themselves forward or laying claim to what isn't theirs by right. Indeed, British history is full of people who have gone to the executioner's block or otherwise ruined themselves rather than dishonour themselves by over-egging the pudding or in any other way compromising their integrity. A case in point was Terence Rattigan's 1946 hit play, The Winslow Boy, which was based upon an infamous case when my late friend Mary Archer Shee's cousin Martin nearly bankrupted himself to defend his son George against the unfair accusation of having stolen a 5-shilling postal order, which he denied having taken. While things have loosened up enough for traditionalists to know that it is no longer necessary to endanger one's prosperity to defend oneself against a petty accusation, and to accept that hype forms a more acceptable part of modern life than it used to, people still adhere strictly to the dictum, lay claim only to what is your due. This early error on Meghan's part would come back to haunt her once she made the transition from modest Hollywood stardom to the superstardom with which being a member of the British royal family invested her, because it was living proof that she was prone to exaggeration. This would doubtless make no dent in the way she was viewed in North America, where Hollywood and its ways have greater acceptance than they do in Britain. But on this side of the Atlantic, it did alert people to the fact that the new Duchess of Sussex had both a propensity for exaggeration and a flair for dramatics in a way that the British find suspect. According to Ninaki Priddy, Meghan's best friend from childhood, attention, approbation, and applause have always been driving forces for her. "Meg always wanted to be a star," she said. Despite this, she was normal and likeable, even though she did exhibit some of the grit that would later on lead to her outstanding success. The two women knew each other from the age of 2 when they started at the Hollywood Little Red Schoolhouse together. At the age of 11, they transferred to Immaculate Heart. "It was always Nicky and Meg. We were so close-knit. We came as a 2. We were both honorary daughters in each other's homes. We were like family," she said. Hers is the most trustworthy account of Meghan's early years. It is balanced, truthful, shorn of all side, with no malice or self-aggrandizement to undermine it. She was there, and nothing she says fails to ring true. According to Nicky, her mum Doria was very cool. She was this free spirit who'd dance around the house and have girly evenings with us. She used to tell Meg to loosen up. She'd say, "You've got to have fun, keep working at it." Even at that early age, Meghan was displaying signs of the intensity which would take her so far, but which would also interfere with her enjoyment of life unless she kept it in check. Despite her fun-loving side, Doria had firm boundaries and trained Meghan to be well-ordered domestically. Tom allowed her more space. He allowed us to get away with things. He provided a less strict household. But Meghan was the star to both her parents. In a way, she was nurtured on a stage. She knew no other life. Tom was a great coach in that respect. He'd take photos of her on stage right from a young age. The result was that Meg always wanted to be famous. She just loved to be the centre of attention. We used to imagine her receiving an Oscar. She used to practice announcing herself. Even at that tender age, Meghan displayed character traits that were exceptional. I admired the skillful way she handled her parents. She'd have to relay messages. It was literally stuff like, "Tell your mother" or "Tell your father." Controlling her emotions is something she learnt back then. For as long as I knew Meghan, her parents weren't together. It could be hard for her. Sometimes she felt she had to pick sides. She was always trying to make sure each of them was happy. The result was that she has always been very poised, a natural mediator. She was tough too. If you rubbed her up the wrong way, she'd make it known with the silent treatment. Whenever there was a problem, Nicky found, I'd always be the first to apologize. I just wanted to be besties again. She was stubborn. She digs her heels in the ground. So close were the girls that Meghan often slept over at the Priddy's house in North Hollywood. Meghan often swam in their pool. When the girls were 15, Dalton and Maria Priddy invited Meghan to join the family, which included Nicky's younger sister Michelle, on a tour of Europe. Nicky was so smitten by Paris that she ended up spending the following summer at the Sorbonne, but Meghan was more turned on by London. They stayed at a hotel near Kensington Palace and, of course, went to Buckingham Palace, where the duo was photographed sitting on the railings opposite Queen Victoria's statue, with the palace in the background. Nicky confirmed that the royal family was something she found fascinating. She had one of Princess Diana's books on her bookshelf. She watched Diana's funeral, was moved to tears as were her friends, and so obsessed did she become that she and another friend, Susie Ardakani, got hold of old videos of Diana's 1981 wedding to Prince Charles and decided to emulate her humanitarian example by collecting clothes and toys to be distributed amongst less privileged children. The lesson she was learning was that the most stylish and glamorous women show how special they are not only in their personal presentation, but through humanitarianism. She had found her role model and used to love The Princess Diaries, films about a commoner who becomes part of a royal family. She was very taken with that idea. She wants to be Princess Diana 2.0, Nicky Priddy said. Of course, Meghan had no idea what the future held for her, nor that she would one day have an office in Buckingham Palace, or that she would chafe against palace restrictions in much the same way the mother-in-law she would never meet had resisted hers. At the time, though, Meghan's ambitions were more perfunctory. Her most immediate one was to go to Northwestern University. and to escape from her father, who now needed more reciprocity than she was willing to provide. In 1990, Tom had won $750,000 in the California state lottery. Although much of it was dissipated in an ill-advised investment in a jewelry business with a friend from Chicago, it nevertheless provided him with the means to work less and indulge his children even more than he had previously done. All members of the Markle family confirm that Tom was always exceedingly generous. Tom Jr. was given the funds to start up a flower shop, and Samantha was bought a second car to replace the first gift she had written off, while Meghan's school fees, always expensive, were covered more easily out of the proceeds of the win. During her years at Immaculate Heart, Meghan threw herself into dramatics more than into anything else. Her ambition, as Nikki has stated, was to be a star. This was an ambition her father shared and fostered. Known at the school as an Emmy Award-winning lighting director who was nominated virtually every year, the dramatics department was only too pleased when Meghan delivered him up as the technical director of every production in which she was involved. One cannot help thinking that even at that early age, Meghan was learning the benefits of one hand washing the other, of how much of an additional advantage it was when you had something else aside from mere talent to help you along in achieving your ambitions, and of how those ambitions could be further enhanced by the skill of knowledgeable people such as her father. While Thomas Markle Sr.'s technical abilities undoubtedly improved the quality of each production Meghan was in, he also used each opportunity to further enhance his daughter's knowledge of what would and would not work on stage. He taught her all about finding the light, or the importance of light and shade, of where to stand on stage, even what angle to deploy for maximum effect. He would also take an endless stream of photographs of her so that she could see for herself what he meant when he told her to do this and not do that. This technical knowledge was invaluable, for he was teaching her at the cradle what most actors only learnt when they were approaching the grave after a lifetime of trial and error. The former child actress, Gigi Perreault, taught acting at her alma mater as well as helping with the staging of plays and musicals. She remembered that she never had a problem with Meghan, who was spot on, learnt her lines and was very dedicated, very focused. Because of Meghan's dedication, she knew she would be something special. Meghan, however, wanted to be a star both on stage and off. By the time she was a teenager, she had had enough attention from boys to know that they found her attractive and that she liked them as well. Thereafter, she would be the female lead in many a real-life romance, starting out simply enough with the boys from the masculine counterpart of her school, St. Francis High School in nearby La Cañada, Flintridge. Founded by the Capuchin friars of the Western American province of Our Lady of Angels in 1946, on lands bought from the Flintridge Country Club, its students interacted with the Immaculate Heart girls on the basis of equality. Like most institutions whose ambition was to turn out a superior form of human being, both schools were eager to restrict the activities of their students so that they focused on what was desirable and life-enhancing, rather than opening them up to undesirable influences. Chief amongst these restrictions was fraternization with anyone who was not a peer. It was an accepted feature of both schools that their students could mix with each other, but that they should exercise caution with outsiders. There was something old-fashioned about their desire to protect the students against undesirable influences. While this played well in a society like America, where there is frank acknowledgement of the desirability of people of status sticking together as they assist one another on the path to greater success, in Europe such attitudes were already viewed as not only dangerously old-fashioned and damagingly restrictive, but as snobbish. It really was a case of a new society keeping up the lines of demarcation while an older society was intent on bringing them down, at least enough for there to be greater mobility between the classes. This difference in cultural attitudes would prove to have a defining effect upon Meghan and Harry's relationships, not only with each other, but also with everyone else. In the meantime, the young Meghan availed herself of a series of willing beaux from St. Francis, and at the age of 16 narrowed them down to Louis Segura, her first serious boyfriend. A Latino who had a reputation as a natty dresser, they were together for 2 years. She was friends with the whole Segura family and was encouraged by all of them to put herself forward as St. Francis's homecoming queen. Although unknown in Britain, in the US, homecoming queens were and remain big deals in high schools, and Meghan went all out to win, writing an essay on her work at the hippie kitchen and charming as many people as possible to vote for her. She won, and bedecked in a pale blue strapless satin gown and tiara, Queen Meghan was accompanied by a phalanx of courtiers to the ball by Louis's younger brother Danny, natty in a tuxedo with a wing-collared shirt and a ready-made black bow tie. Meghan took her success in her stride. Some girls might have changed their demeanour, but she remained the same sweet, charming, accessible, but refined girl who was fun to be with and nice to all. According to friends, it was almost as if she was using this success as practice for what was to come, as if it was no big deal, because it was really what she deserved and was entitled to. She intended to be a great star, and this was but the first taste, and therefore of no real significance. In the 1997 programme notes for Stephen Sondheim's musical Into the Woods, in which Meghan played Little Red Riding Hood, she also stated that she wanted to attend Northwestern University outside Chicago, as it would be a first step on her journey to Broadway. In her final yearbook, she went a step further and described herself as classy, a word which would remain a firm favourite of hers, and whose meaning meant much to her in practical as well as philosophical terms. To underscore her ambition and self-belief, she illustrated her photograph with a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. "Women are like tea bags. They don't realise how strong they are until they're in hot water." None of Meghan's peers thought her immodest or pretentious, although she was already prone to quoting aphorisms, something she still does. As far as onlookers were concerned, she was a jewel in search of the right setting so that she could shine even more brightly than she was shining at the moment. Ambition was good. She and her father had done and would continue to do whatever it took to enhance her prospects, from having expensive orthodontia so that she would have a perfect smile, to having the bulbous tip of her nose refined via plastic surgery. This was a fairly common procedure amongst aspiring actresses in Hollywood. Even the fabled beauty Elizabeth Taylor had done it in her teenage. It was a simple procedure. Cartilage was removed so that the tip of the nose was sharper than nature had intended. In Meghan's case, however, the procedure would become more noticeable with the passage of time, as the cartilage between the tip and the bone drooped, giving her nose a ski jump effect which, ironically, Harry had naturally. When Meghan graduated from Immaculate Heart in June 1999, her academic and personal attributes were apparent for all to note at the Hollywood Bowl where the ceremony was held. As well as her graduation certificate, she was presented with the Notre Dame Club of Los Angeles Achievement Award, the Bank of America Fine Arts Award, a commendation in the National Achievement Scholarship Program, and an award for mentoring younger students. Although Meghan had won 3 scholarships and could have entered several colleges either as a scholarship or a paying student, the thought had never entered her head that she should go anywhere but where she wanted. She had been brought up by her parents to have her desires fulfilled, and what she wanted was to attend Northwestern University. This institution was and remains one of the most prestigious private research colleges in the United States. Fees were over $50,000 in today's prices. It is ranked 9th amongst the American universities and has the 10th largest university endowment in the country, valued at more than $11 billion. Based at Evanston, Illinois, its main campus covers some 240 acres, while its secondary campus in Chicago covers 25 acres. There is a third campus in Doha, Qatar. The university's former and present faculty and alumni include 19 Nobel Prize laureates, 38 Pulitzer Prize winners, 16 Rhodes Scholars, 6 MacArthur Genius Fellows, 65 American Academy of Arts and Sciences members, 2 Supreme Court justices, and its School of Communication is a leading producer of Academy Award, Emmy Award, and Tony Award directors, playwrights, writers, actors, and actresses. Although Tom had lost a large part of his lottery winnings, he was still a highly successful lighting director, and he took out bank loans and put in the extra hours necessary to raise the money needed to send his treasured flower to the university, which would be but a stepping stone on her journey to ever-increasing success. Considering Meghan's stated purpose in attending Northwestern was to become a Broadway star, the fact that she chose to major in English rather than acting suggests that she was either not quite as confident as she seemed to be, or then that she was so confident that she didn't feel the need to specialize in her chosen field. Leaving the protection of home is challenging for any youngster, but Meghan had both greater advantages and disadvantages than most of her peers. Being a child of Hollywood, she was far more sophisticated than her fellow students on the Eastern Seaboard. She dressed better, had more style, knew how to present herself better than they did, and had more confidence than most of them. She made friends with both boys and girls as soon as she burst upon the Evanston campus. She had pared down her look to what she regarded as monochromatic chic. She now wore much more makeup than she had been allowed to in California, and even took to highlighting her hair. Always deliberate, measured and calculating in the positive sense of the word, she also watched and waited before deciding which sorority to join. Once she made up her mind, she went straight for her target, turning on the power of her personality in an irresistible onslaught, and not surprisingly got initiated into Kappa Kappa Gamma with its clutch of intelligent and hot girls. The thing we all have in common, according to fellow member Melania Hidalgo, is that we're all drive, intelligent and ambitious. They were also avid party girls, hitting the bottle more than their books, networking in the belief that who you met might well prove more useful in the future than what you knew. So successfully did Meghan fit in that she would ultimately be elected to chair recruitment for the sorority. As Meghan tells it, she had one disadvantage most of her sisters did not. Northwestern was primarily Caucasian. Most of the students came from white environments. They were not used to interracial interaction, and by her own account, she found one of the reactions stifling. She recounted to Elle magazine how she had to navigate closed-mindedness to the tune of a dorm mate I met my first week at university, who asked if my parents were still together. "You said your mom is black and your father is white, right?" she said. I smiled meekly, waiting for what could possibly come out of her pursed lips next. "And they're divorced?" I nodded. "Oh, well, that makes sense." To this day I don't fully understand what she meant by that, but I understood the implication, and I drew back. I was scared to open this Pandora's box of discrimination, so I sat stifled, swallowing my voice. Someone who knows Meghan well from childhood warns against taking these defining moments too literally. She has always had a propensity to embellish, to draw dramatic lessons out of the most anodyne events, and especially since she became a public figure, to use poetical license to highlight a point she wishes to make, but which might not actually have happened the way she recounts it. Since investigation has never been able to turn up this racist dorm mate, notwithstanding the fact that there are records of which students shared quarters, it seems likely that this story is apocryphal rather than reminiscent. Her friend explains. The way to tell is how neatly Meghan's reminiscences fit the story. Meg's inventions are too tailor-made to be reliable. People just don't act the way she says. Once you know her, you can tell which stories are Meghan and which really happened. Such incidents, whether actual or embroidered, were fortunately few and far between. By her own account, Meghan's sensitivity regarding her race followed her from inclusive California to exclusive Illinois, despite no one noticing how affected she was by it. Since there are no contemporaneous accounts of her experiencing any actual racial difficulties, and her lifestyle suggests that she was fully accepted by all quarters, and indeed that she flourished in a way any girl with real problems would not have done, this suggests that she encountered no significant or actual prejudice. It also suggests that she had transcended such internal racial uncertainties as she would later claim to have possessed, so well that they did not prevent her from achieving all she wanted. Of course, we must take her word for the fact that they remained internal sources of discomfort, but the degree of acceptance also reflected positively upon her classmates at Northwestern, two of whom would remain her friends into the present time. As her freshman year got underway, Meghan partied up a storm, was popular with the girls as well as the boys, and got herself one of the hottest boyfriends on campus when she paired up with a white, 6'5" basketball player from Lakewood, Ohio, named Steve Lepore. He was on the basketball team in his sophomore year and would prove to be as disciplined and focused as she was. But he was more interested in fitness than partying, intending to qualify as a pro, and made all the necessary sacrifices, such as foregoing female companionship the night before a game, in keeping with standard practice amongst basketball, baseball, football, and hockey players. At the end of that academic year, he transferred to Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where he became a standout player. At the time of writing, he is an assistant coach on Eastern Kentucky University's men's basketball staff, and with his wife Carrie, is a proud parent to their young daughter, Juliana Rudy. Patently, the relationship was not serious enough for Meghan to follow him, and she lost no time in replacing him in her affections, though for the remainder of her time at Northwestern, she was never again one half of such a dynamic duo. This had no perceptible effect upon the pleasure Meghan was having at college. She developed 3 friendships, which went some way towards replacing the gap left when geography separated her from Nikki Priddy. Although the childhood friends kept in touch, Meghan now found a substitute of sorts in Lindsay Jill Roth, the attractive blonde daughter of Jewish lawyers from the prosperous Long Island village of Lattingtown, within the town of Oyster Bay in Nassau County, New York. With a population of less than 2,000, of whom 94% were white, it had no real parallels with Woodland Hills, save for both areas being predominantly white and both having median incomes above the regional averages, with Woodland Hills being a bit less than $100,000 per annum, while Lattingtown was half again as much. The two girls now became fast friends after meeting in a Toni Morrison literature class in their first year at Northwestern. They drank together, partied together, studied together, and later on when they left college, they kept in touch, as Lindsay became a producer for Larry King Now, The Real Girl's Kitchen, and Queen Boss, as well as publishing What Pretty Girls Are Made Of in 2015. Meanwhile, Meghan struggled until she got the role of Rachel Zane in Suits. In 2016, when Lindsay married an Englishman named Gavin Jordan, Meghan was her matron of honour. This is revealing, for when Meghan married Trevor Engelson in 2011, she chose Nikki Priddy to be her maid of honour. Despite this, the bond between Meghan and Roth was strong. "We're the kind of friends," she said, "who can be 3,000 miles away and still be talking about or thinking the same thing, and even texting each other the same thing at the same time, miles away. I don't know many people who are as generous and supportive as Meg is. I think people assume that when someone gains notoriety that they change, but she's still the same girl I met years ago, with the same values and priorities. She's selfless, and that's just a part of who she is and who she was raised to be. There's a motto that Meg and I have consistently come back to throughout the years. I choose happiness. It's a constant reminder to be self-aware, be uniquely you, be happy, and to treat people with respect, to be kind, empathetic, and to really learn from those around you in any circumstance. Meg does that. Meg has especially developed into an extraordinary businesswoman, actress, writer, and advocate for women and children. Meghan had made another girlfriend with whom she would keep in touch. This was Genevieve Hillis, her sorority sister from Kappa Kappa Gamma, but her other closest friend at the time wasn't Genevieve but an African-American named Larnell Quentin Foster. He was a gay but heavily closeted son of pastors who he felt would be disappointed if they knew of his sexuality. He studied acting at Northwestern and would ultimately become a professor of drama. He is now openly gay. In college, though, he lived locally with his parents. He and Meghan became something of an item, often going to avant-garde theatre shows or just hanging out. We were very social. We were always doing different things, having fun. She was ambitious to be an actress, but we didn't want to be in rehearsals all day like a lot of the others. We would much rather watch a show than be in one. Meghan often joined the Foster family for meals on weekends and was so much a part of the family's activities that she would attend services at their church with them. She and Larnell also enjoyed cooking together. Her speciality at the time was Indian cuisine. Larnell would later describe Meghan as being very kind, very genuine, someone who cares deeply about her family, her friends, and the world. Having turned down 3 scholarships to attend Northwestern and study English, Meghan had not been at the university long before she realised that she had made the wrong choice of major. She therefore opted to change to theatre arts and international relations. Although she still aspired to stardom, she was now broadening her horizons to include the possibility of the corps diplomatique as a stage. At no time did she consider that hers would be an ordinary life. One of her old-time friends, who asked to remain anonymous, said, "She intended to be a high flyer no matter what she did. She could envisage herself as a Broadway or film star, or an ambassador or a diplomat whose actions would change the world while improving the lot of humanity." With that in mind, Meghan approached her father's elder brother, Michael, a State Department operative whose specialty was US government communication systems. Within the family, it was accepted that he was CIA. He had been posted to such disparate places as Berlin, Guam, Bucharest, and Ottawa with his wife Toni, who would die in 2012. He was known to be popular and well-connected within the State Department. Meghan wanted him to find her an internship with the US Embassy abroad. She explained that she was considering a career in international relations and wanted to test the water with some practical experience of the diplomatic life to see if she would like being a diplomat. The difficulty was, she had left it so late that getting her what she wanted would mean calling in additional favours from friends. "I knew the American ambassador in Buenos Aires," Michael Markle said. "I personally talked to him and got her fixed up with the internship she wanted." As a result of her uncle's string-pulling, she was offered a 6-week-long internship as a junior press officer at the American Embassy in Argentina's capital city. While there, her duties were those of any other junior press attaché. She answered inquiries, drafted letters, shunted paper from one department to another, generally making herself useful, doing what was effectively donkey work. But she struck her superior, Mark Krishik, as both efficient and ingenious. If she had stayed with the State Department, she would have been an excellent addition to the US diplomatic corps. She had all that it takes to be a successful diplomat. Attitude and personality, however, were not sufficient to enter the State Department. One also had to pass the Foreign Service Officer test, which Meghan sat while in Argentina. To her chagrin, she failed it. However, she had planned to fly to Madrid at the end of her internship under the International Education for Students program to take their 6-week course in Spanish. She adhered to that plan and would later on find the knowledge she gained useful. She was not tempted, however, to resit the exam. Unused as she was to failure, she decided that her future lay in acting. Diplomacy had only been a pipe dream. She had become aware that that career path would be strewn with too many difficulties. Not only would she have a longer and harder road to travel before she became the star she wanted to be, but the rewards, close up, seemed less attractive than being a star of stage or screen. In that, her assessment was accurate, for no matter how high-flying a careerist diplomat is, the top of the corps diplomatique simply doesn't have the pizzazz or the allure that becoming a stage or screen star does. This taste of failure, however, was but the first gulp of a potion that Meghan would have to swallow time and again throughout her 20s. Shining brightly in high school and university is not always a precursor to worldly success. In fact, those who sparkle in such safe and structured settings often fail to light up the real world, while those who were more mundane students soar to greater heights once they're released into the hurly-burly of the real world. So it would prove with Meghan when she graduated from Northwestern's School of Communication with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Theatre and International Studies. While Meghan shone at school and university, Harry...
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.